Hiya, I'm Jasper, and welcome to your video review for Oppenheimer, spoiler edition. So link in the description for my spoiler-free review, so go and watch that if you haven't seen the movie yet. But this is my spoiler edition review, so spoiler alert. Alrighty, so really with this review, I just wanted to kind of talk about some things that I didn't really want to talk about in the spoiler-free review because I felt like it would be giving too much away or distracting from the point of the movie. But I still want to talk about them, so here we are. So, first off, there are so many actors and actresses in this movie that you will recognize. So, yes, we talked about Cillian Murphy in this. I'm sorry, Cillian Murphy. Emily Blunt was amazing. Robert Downey Jr. So I want to talk about him for a minute because, you know what? No, I'll talk about him in a second. But it also has Alden Ehrenreich, who was the guy who played Solo in the movie Solo. He's not a bad actor. I'm not saying Solo was a good movie, but he is not a bad actor. So it's cool to see him in another role that, like, it's small, it's short, but it's got some taste to it. I like it. And then you got Scott Grimes, who plays the engineer dude or pilot dude from Orville, and I like him. It also has Jason Clarke, who you might remember as the dude from White House Down or Terminator Genesis as, John Connor. And I liked him in both those and the other things that I've just kind of seen him around in. And that's the thing, is that a lot of these actors I've seen in a bunch of different things, but not necessarily like known them by name, but like, oh, that's, whoever, that's Brad Pitt. That's like, I know them by face and that I see them in things, but not necessarily by name. So it also has Tony Goldwyn, who in the movie Plane with Gerard Butler, he played the like guy that they called in to fix the problems after they fucked everything up. Also, he was in the Divergent series, The Mechanic, The Last Samurai, and he was, of course, the one that I remember him most as, the CEO Michael Drucker in The Sixth Day with Arnold Schwarzenegger. There was also James Darcy, who was in Cloud Atlas, Master and Commander, and Jupiter Ascending, so I like that he's in this one. Kenneth Branagh, who played Hercule Poirot in Murder on the Orient Express, as well as the sequel, Death on the Nile, and he was also in Tenet. Then there's also Harry Groener, who you might remember as that fun mayor from Buffy in season 3, who was like a demon eating things or whatever. And then Josh Hartnett, as well as Matthew Modine, who played the like badish British guy. Well, not British, but the baddish guy from Stranger Things. Season 1, he was like the bad guy, and then season 2 or 3, whatever we're on, they kind of soften him up a little bit. Season 4 maybe is where they soften him. Anywho, he's the baddish guy. And then there was also David Dastmalchian, who was the Dark Knight Joker thug dude, who was just one of those guys. And then he also was in Dune as Peter DeVries, and he was also in The Suicide Squad as the Polka Dot Man, who is probably where I remember him best from. Of course, there was Matt Damon, and then there was Dane DeHaan, Josh Peck, Jack Quaid, a.k.a. the dude from, like, the skinny dude from The Boys, and I like that he's getting more work. Rami Malek, who is always a win, as well as Casey Affleck, Harrison Gilbertson, who you might remember as Atticus. He was Atticus in the new show, The Peripheral. If you haven't seen that, you should. It's excellent. He was also in Upgrade. And then there's James Renard, who was in The Rookie, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He does some voices in the Destiny video game series, as well as, where I remember him most, as Dexter's dad in Dexter. And then there was also Gary motherfucking Oldman. So you might remember him as Gordon from the Nolan Batman series, as well as in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, as well as The Darkest Hour, where he played Winston Churchill, as well as Dracula, like Bram Stoker's Dracula, where he played, Dracula. And then, of course, my favorite role of his, which is the Detective Stansfield from Leon the Professional. But, a close runner-up, and where probably the rest of you know him from, is as Jean-Baptiste Emmanuel Zorg from The Fifth Element. And then, finally, we get to Florence Pugh. And it's some of the reason why I wanted to make this spoiler review. Because those of you who don't know, Florence Pugh was in The Black Widow. She plays the Black Widow's sister, among other things that she's been in. But that's where I know her best from, and she is an excellent actress. I've liked her in the couple things that I've seen her in, but also she's really hot, and she is nude in this a number of times because there's a number of sex scenes between her and Oppenheimer, and she has just the most amazing rack. So, if you wanted to see her nude on a giant IMAX screen, go ahead and watch this movie on a giant IMAX screen because she's there and it's beautiful, and I mean it does also work for the story. Like, it's not unnecessarily gratuitous, in my opinion anyway. And there's I think it's not funny, but like it's kind of funny to think about during the interview scene where he's just getting all these questions that are just revealing him, and so I love the thematic approach of it, of having him having to answer these questions that are clearly uncomfortable because his wife is like right behind him and having to admit these things that he did with Florence Pugh. And so they did this camera thing where they like moved it, and he went from like being clothed and getting questioned to just like now he's naked and like, yeah, there's a table in the way, but he's naked, and having that go on. So it's symbolic that he's having to be naked in front of all these people, and so then I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then what kind of surprised me is that then they had it like they moved the camera back and were showing Emily Blunt's character, who is his current wife, and then boom, Florence Pugh is on Oppenheimer, and she's like seeing the face and like making eye contact as she's like thrusting onto him as they're both naked. So he's still like answering the questions, but like now it's basically from Emily Blunt's perspective of like now she's having to think about this and think about like how everyone in this room is thinking about that happening with her husband with this chick. And that's just it's interesting for a number of different reasons for me. So anywho, check out that scene along with the other scene where they're both naked and having this discussion. It's kind of a sad discussion, and honestly, how she ends is pretty sad. I personally think it was only like a split second, but I personally feel like they were hinting at, and I'm going to go with the theory that she was murdered and made to look like a suicide, despite her, unhappiness at the exact moment last time that he saw her. But anywho, moving on from there, one of the other things that I wanted to talk about was how we're just going to gloss over the fact that at the beginning of the movie, he just straight up was going to murder his professor who he said he liked. Like, we're just going to gloss right over that. Like, don't worry about that. Like, it's, like, think about that. 3 hours in, you're not thinking about the fact that in the first, 5 minutes, his plan was to poison and kill his professor. And yeah, he, like, had second thoughts and came back, but, like, if his professor had just taken that apple home at the end of the first day, motherfucker would have been dead, And even then, do you think that if his professor was having a conversation with somebody else who he also didn't like, do you think he would have risked the reputational whatever to like bash the apple out of the guy's hand rather than some professor that he really respected? I don't know, but it's interesting that from the color, it's means that it's from Oppenheimer's perspective. He's just straight up like, yeah, I was gonna murder my professor, who he claimed to like. So yeah, that's an interesting fellow, who apparently was charismatic. I do also like that in the like one of the hallway scenes later on. This is just me talking about what I like at this point, but how they're like, oh, this guy turned against you because he thought like that you were having an affair with his wife, like with this dude's wife, and then that caused that dude's husband to like have a heart attack because he found out and couldn't handle it or whatever. And Oppenheimer's response was like, well, that's ridiculous. He never found out. Like, bro, just bro. Anywho, and then the last thing is, hopefully you've all seen Chronicles of Riddick, because spoiler alert for that movie at this exact point. But I loved the scene where like we're getting this interview with Robert Downey Jr. and then he's like, these other people with the congressional thing, and it looks like he's winning, and that Oppenheimer's looking bad, and then you go back into their room and they have their little thing, and then he goes up, and so like this whole thing, it just it's this setup for just like, oh, he's about to just like, get that last 3-pointer or whatever. He's just about to just swish, nothing but net. And then Rami Malek comes in and just fucks all that up. And that moment, like when he started talking, and then they like cut to Robert Downey Jr. and just that moment, that's so reminded me of the Chronicles of Riddick when Vin Diesel and the Underverse guy have been fighting this whole time, and then Carl Urban's character comes out with the like giant ridiculous tri-axe looking thing, and he's like and like coming down, and then his like wife turns her back and she's like flawless, because they've been like planning on taking out the Underverse guy. She's just like flawless, and then Underverse guy had been like doing his special power move to get away from him and ends up in front of Vin Diesel, who stabs him in the head with a knife and breaks off the knife, and so Underverse guy dies. And so everybody's like and so she turns around like, what? And then no, like does that like hand thing, just like that moment in Chronicles of Riddick is how I was seeing that moment in the Oppenheimer like courtroom like congressional hearing scene. Was just like he had it in the bag, and he was like, this is flawless, I had this, like, this is politics, I got this nailed. And he was gloating about it to the guy who was to Solo, who is clearly like, yeah, you're gross type of thing. And then it just blows up in his face right at the last second. It's just like, no. And then he doesn't get his election to, or appointed to whatever seat, I don't care. So just that moment was fantastic on so many levels for me personally. I don't know what it reminded you of, or if you just enjoyed it in general, but that was one of my favorite moments of the whole movie. And it doesn't even really have Oppenheimer in it, but that's fun. So yeah, once again, just go ahead and see this movie. I think it's worth it. It's a fun time, and especially with all those actors in it. And it's fun because those are just the actors that like I've known enough by like face to be like, oh yeah, let me get your name real quick and what you've been in that I've seen you in. But it'll be interesting in like 10 years to come look at this movie again and be like, oh, look at all these people that were also in this that didn't even like weren't on the like name list yet. And now they're big actors and actresses, because I feel like that has happened so many times with so many movies, and it's fun to see when you go back with these large ensemble cast movies and see people whose careers have just flourished. So, yeah, another rewatchability at least in a few years. So, that's all I have for this one. Thanks for coming. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you at the next one. Bye.